Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is AIDS and white females. And we have to talk about AIDS and white females, Miss Debbie Runions. Miss Runions is an AIDS prevention educator. And of course, Miss Runions, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And we are glad to have you here, primarily because we've talked about this disease of AIDS on so many occasions, and I think we've had an opportunity to talk about the impact that it has had on the African American community, the impact that it is having on black females and whatnot, but we've never had an opportunity to talk about the impact that this disease is having specifically upon white females. And we're simply encouraged by the fact that you being an AIDS prevention educator have agreed to talk to us about that today. But before we get into that, Mrs. Runyon, let's see if we can have you to give us some information about your background, your education, and some of the things that eventually led you to become an AIDS prevention educator.
Okay, I am from Humphreys County. I'm a Tennessee native, born and raised in Waverly, married my childhood sweetheart. He died in a car accident when he was 32. We'd been married 12 and a half years. And I had married the first boy I ever went out with, so it took me a while to decide to date. I had 2 young children. But when I did, it was in the 80s, and we were just beginning to hear about this disease, but it was never talked about as something that a woman should worry about. So in 1989, I met the man who shared the virus with me. I did not become infected until 1992 from one exposure. And everything changed. I am a journalist by profession, and I was working with the Tennessee Business Roundtable, which is a group of CEOs across the state of Tennessee. And because I was already a journalist, I thought, and I also taught journalism at Nashville State, I thought I am in a perfect position to go public with this. I was the first person I'd ever known to become infected. And I think I was the first person a lot of people had known. I wrote for the Tennessean on a fairly regular basis. My picture came with my column. And so a lot of people knew who I was. And because I write about personal things, they knew my family. And so it seemed to me to be the right thing to do to go public. I asked my children first because there is a social stigma that goes with being infected, and I knew that it would reach down and touch my children, and I didn't want to do that to them without their permission. So that's what I did. They thought it was a good idea, and I began speaking. I didn't know how to speak, but I was a journalist, so I knew how to tell a story. And it turned out that because I was one of the first women to go public in the state of Tennessee, that I moved very quickly into the public arena and moved on up to the national level. After only 3 speeches, I was asked if I wanted to apply for President Clinton's advisory council. It had not been created yet. He was just trying to pick. And I said, well, sure. So I did, and my chances, there were about 800 people who applied for 30 positions, and I was chosen. I think it might have had something to do with Al Gore being from Tennessee.
Okay, very good. Okay, it probably did. It probably did.
But people asked me how that happened. I said, I don't know. But that might have had something to do with it.
And so you became involved in it from a national point of view, that is working directly with a presidential commission in a real sense, dealing with this as a disease.
Yes.
What were some of your thoughts? And we're just about ready for our first commercial break. We've got about 50 seconds. But let's start off by giving us some of your thoughts in reference to your responsibilities on that particular commission, and then we'll pick it up after our break.
Okay. I was On the prevention committee, I work specifically with young programs for young people because of what I do here. I work for the Tennessee Department of Education on a grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to talk to kids across the state about HIV. And because that was my little part of expertise, that's the one I was on, the committee I was on.
Very good. And of course, let us make preparations for this first commercial break here, Ms. Runyon, and then we'll come back and talk about other aspects. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to this final segment of this second segment of the show for the morning. The topic is AIDS and white females. And we have with us to talk about this particular topic, Ms. DRunions. And of course, Ms. Runyon, we promised before the end of our first segment that we'd give you an opportunity to talk about the devastating impact that this disease is having upon white females. As we indicated earlier, we have quite a bit of statistical information dealing with the impact upon African Americans, the impact upon African American females, but we also know that this disease is also having an impact, as you have demonstrated, upon white females. And so that's the kind of information that we'd like for you to try to give at this particular time.
All right. Well, when I became infected in 1992, only 4% of the people in the United States who had the infection were women. Today in Tennessee, we're right at 30% of the new infections are female. About 25% are white and 74%, we have an other category, but most are African American women. But when I became infected, my daughter, who is a very outgoing person, decided that she needed for me to go to England before I died. And she wrote Regis and Kathy Lee and wrote to them about my infection. It was the first time they ever used the word AIDS in their show. And I was chosen as one of the mothers to be honored, and we did win a trip to England. While we were there, we went to Cornwall, and while we were there, we spoke to 3 Rotary clubs in Cornwall, which is like a county, and it's at the southernmost tip. And we went there, and they did not have as much HIV as we had, because they have education, sexuality education from the time they're very young, so they don't have the same problem that we have here. So that was my very first experience with being sort of a minority. And when I went to Washington, I found out that there are very few women who are willing or able to go public and talk about these things. So it was important for me. I felt it was important for me to do that. Let me just say, one of the other reasons why I was able to go public is because I knew my family would support me. I knew my children would. I knew my mother. My dad had died by this time. I knew my brothers would support me. And not everybody has that kind of support from their family. I also called my editor as soon as I found out, and I said, someday I want to talk about this. So he said, when you get ready, will you write about it in the paper? And I said, yes. And it took me a few months, and I didn't call him, but he called me, and already from the 4%, we had jumped to 10%.
Just in that time
Yes, in less than a year. And he said, Debbie, have you seen the numbers for women? And I said, no. And he said, you've got to go public, and now's the time to do it. So that's what I did in August of '93. So we were at 10% in '93, and now we're at 30%.
And 30% of the population affected by this particular disease.
Those of us who are infected, 30% of them are female.
Now, what has been the attitude of, and I think you've already indicated that most women have refused to go public simply because of the stigma that is attached to it. But do you find that to be general among most of them?
Yes, I find it to be general among most people with HIV infection. Either they're drug users, they're gay, they're having sex, and maybe outside of marriage. Anyway, they don't want people to know, and it's very hard to say I got this in a relationship that was outside of marriage. It's hard to go into the schools and talk to kids about that, but it's also easy to tell them, and this is why you need to choose a different path.
This is especially true if you can indicate that only on one indiscretion that this happened to you, and of course I think many people believe that it's something that can happen to somebody else if it does not happen to, this is what information I've sort of gleaned from it, that if it does not happen to somebody else, then you don't know anything about it, and et cetera. But you're saying that this could be a disease that can impact almost any person. There's no person that can be immune from this.
Right, and I get kids back, letters from kids, and one of my favorite ones was, I went home, my mother is divorced. I went home and sat her down and gave her a good talking to. I didn't know mothers could get HIV infection. So I tell the kids are really more better informed than the adults are. So I say, okay, now you have all this information. Go home and talk to your parents about it and educate them. Because it's people my age who are the most prejudiced, and that's because they're the most uninformed.
Well, now in the long run, I think that we've said time and time again that this disease is almost continually increasing in terms of numbers, and that it's having a tremendous impact outside of the United States. In the long run, what do you see as one of the solutions to this problem? Do we simply just go on and try to provide a little education here or there that might not be working all the time?
I am very, very committed to abstinence-based education rather than abstinence only. If you tell people about HIV and don't give them information on how to stay safe, then what good is it, is sort of my opinion. So that's what I do. I really wish we could put so much more money into vaccine research, because as much as we talk, it takes decades to change behavior in anybody. Look how long it took for smoking. We started talking about cigarettes kill you in 1960. And so we're just now getting to the point where it's not socially cool to be a smoker. So it's going to take a while for us to change behavior. And by then, we could have lost a generation of young people.
Well, I think that's my attitude in reference to it. Now, if we're trying to work at it and we're still losing people as we go, then we're going to lose more in the long run than we're able to save. And so it's a very, very challenging kind of situation here. And so now we're getting ready for this final break, Mrs. Runions, and when we come back, we'll allow you an opportunity to continue this discussion. Of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to this final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Mrs. Debbie Runions, and the topic is AIDS and white females. And of course, Ms. Runions, let's give you, during this last segment, an opportunity to talk about some of your activities. We also know that you've been connected with the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, and you've occupied not only positions there, but you have an insight into what is going on in reference to this disease, and perhaps a better insight perhaps than most people would have, primarily because of your relationship with that organization. Let's talk about you and the CDC.
Okay. I work for the Division of Adolescent School Health, and every state in the union who chooses can have money from the CDC to do HIV education. Not every state chooses to do that, but Tennessee does and has for a very long time. When I was talking about the vaccine is going to be years away. When I was on the President's Advisory Council, we asked him to set a date certain, which was 2007, that we would try to do the same as Kennedy when he said, let's go to the moon
Okay.
in 10 years. So our thing was, let's get a vaccine in 10 years. It's very difficult to get a vaccine with HIV because the virus mutates so much, and because there's so many different strains. Now we have drug resistant strains because of those of us who don't take our medicines exactly correctly. And let me just say, it's very difficult to take the medicine correctly. I have a degree, and I had to call my doctor this week and say, am I supposed to be taking 2 of these a day or 1? Or and so I had it all messed up. Plus, it's hard to remember, did I take this in the morning or was that yesterday? So we create mutant strains, and then the vaccine is going to have to deal with that too. The other problem we have is drug manufacturers do not want to work on a vaccine because you're going to have to give the vaccine to the world. It's not going to make a lot of money. Not for the drug company. So they don't want to do it. And you know what they actually said to us on the international panel? They said, if we have a chance to make a vaccine, spend all of our research and development money on a vaccine that we have to give away, or we have a chance to put some more research and development into something like Viagra, what do you think we're going to do?
Okay.
It's just plain old
dollar and cents.
It is. It is. And when we said we will pay the $7 a pill, the $15 a pill, if you will give it to Africa, they said no. We said just give them the patent, just let them be able to make their own, and they said no.
So you really think that it's possible that they could give us some kind of vaccine in some kind of reasonable time, but they are refusing to do it primarily because they can't sell it? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I believe. That's what I heard.
Of course, you got the insight into it, and
that's what I heard them say. And so I was appalled. But I'll tell you who is funding it, and it's Bill and Melinda Gates. They have put more money into vaccine research than the federal government, and certainly more than pharmaceutical companies. So they are going to give it to the world if they ever get it to happen. But I think that's the only way we're ever going to bring the epidemic to an end, because people's behavior is not going to change that much. I'm in a support group, and one of the very smart people, one of the wise people in my group, said that the reason why we continue to have the epidemic is because it's more important to make a connection than it is to live, because life is not worth living without that connection. We're not going to stop people from connecting. We're the only thing that's going to bring it to an end, I believe, is a vaccine. And I have had lots of letters telling me that they wished that their tax dollars did not go to support me, keep me alive, don't help me give any medicine.
Now, you found that to be an attitude that people have exhibited in reference to this disease?
In the last 2 years, never until this last 2 years, I'd never had hate mail, but now I get it. And my response is, we're a community, and it's important that we be kind to each other. And I guess the thing that got me on the President's Council, and the thing that allowed me to speak at the National Convention, is because I have a spiritual outlook on this. I believe that it's here to teach us how to love each other. And the whole story about the pharmaceutical companies, that's not love. Cutting funding for people with HIV is not love. As long as this continues, as long as we continue to be the lepers of society, I don't think there'll be a cure for AIDS. I think it's here to help us.
Well, now, what you're saying is that this is a disease that perhaps we'll have to deal with almost for the rest of, maybe for the rest of this century. It could
I believe so.
And of course, it's spreading all over the world. In
Yes.
some of the countries in Africa and some of the other countries where the problem is, some of the eastern countries, some of the problems are much greater here than in the United States. And still,
True.
you believe that nobody's going to do anything about to help eradicate this disease?
You know, I really want to believe in the goodness of people, but right now I'm having a hard time. And after I got through on the President's Council, I went in a true believer. And I thought I could make a difference. I thought we could make a difference. I thought we could bring an end to HIV in America. And I think we could have, but there is no political will to do that. And that was with someone who loved us.
Okay.
I don't think we've ever had a better friend than Bill Clinton. He loved us. This is not an atmosphere today of love.
That you
So-
can feel comfortable in terms of dealing with something like this.
No, no. In fact, I have never worried about speaking to the children until this past year. And you asked me about the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. My friends have left. The people who have been there for 20 years working on AIDS have left because science is being distorted in order to give a moral message, a religious message, a faith-based message, and it's science. It's just, that was one thing that we kept emphasizing. Follow the science. If the science says this works, let's give that
Let's
a
work.
try. Yeah.
But they're not willing to follow the science of it all. You know, as an educator and as an HIV prevention educator, let's use your knowledge over the last 2 minutes that we have to have you to speak to young people in reference to this disease. Take the entire 2 minutes to sort of give some of the information that you give when you go out and talk to them. And so, because I think many of them are here listening to us now. Go on.
I talk to kids about my own life, and I tell them that I got pregnant at 17 and I didn't realize I wasn't a virgin because nobody would talk to me. And today, we still have people who don't want to discuss these issues. So they have to find a safe person. Sometimes I'm the safe person. I'm a grandmotherly person at this point, and the kids feel safe with me, but they have to find a safe person to tell them everything they need to know about sexuality so that they can be safe. If they don't have information, they're going to make mistakes. They're kids. Their brains are not fully developed yet. The brains won't be developed until they're 25. So you've got a partial brain up here, hormones raging, and a body that is able to be sexually active. It's a recipe for disaster.
Well, do you think, over the last minute, do you think that to include more sexuality information in the curriculum of public schools and elementary schools and et cetera would in the long run have an impact upon this disease?
I think it has to. And not abstinence only. You can't just say don't say no to teenagers. They're not right. They're not thinking straight. They can't say no sometimes.
But we can influence them if we were to put into the curriculum of some of these schools this whole idea of the impact that this disease is having upon everybody. Is that right?
That's right. And kids never think it's going to happen to them. But one of the things I tell them is, if it can happen to me, I'm about the most boring person you ever met. If it can happen to me, it can happen to you. And somebody in this class is going to die in a car wreck on prom night. And somebody's going to get pregnant and somebody's going to get an STD.
Mr. DRunions, let me thank you for giving us that excellent information. Let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.